Please don't touch me. The words never made a sound. They couldn't. Willa Mercer's hands shaped them in the air between her body and the man standing too close behind her, her fingers trembling so badly that the signs came out broken, stuttering like a sentence choking on its own fear. American Sign Language doesn't need a voice to scream, and Willa's hands were screaming. Were. But nobody in that kitchen heard it. Nobody in that diner saw it. Nobody except one man sitting in the last booth by the window, a man with scars on both knuckles and eyes the color of a winter sky just before the storm breaks. Before we get into the story, hit that subscribe button and stay with me until the very end. Drop a comment telling me what state you're watching from. I want to see how far Willa's story travels because what happened in that small Montana diner changed everything. And I mean everything. Rosie's Diner sat on the edge of Black Hollow, Montana, like something time had forgotten about and never bothered to come back for. The paint was peeling, the neon sign out front buzzed and flickered the R in Rosie's burned out 3 years ago, and nobody ever fixed it. The parking lot had more cracks than asphalt, and the bell above the front door had been ringing the same tired note since 1987. But the coffee was good, the eggs were cheap, and Rosie Gallagher, all 73 years of her, still showed up every single morning at 4:30 to fire up the griddle and unlock the doors, because that's what she'd been doing for 41 years, and she wasn't about to stop now. At 5:47 on a Tuesday morning in late October, the diner smelled like bacon grease and burnt toast, and the kind of quiet desperation that seeps into the walls of places where people go when they've got nowhere better to be. Willa Mercer moved behind the counter like a ghost. That's the only word for it. She didn't walk, she drifted. Shoulders hunched, eyes down her body, pulled in tight like she was trying to take up as little space in the world as humanly possible. She was 22 years old, 5'4", reddish brown hair pulled back in a ponytail that had been done in a hurry, and a face that might have been beautiful if it wasn't so busy trying to disappear. She wore the same uniform every day. White shirt, black apron sleeves, pulled down past her wrists no matter how warm it was. Always past her wrists. She had a notepad in her apron pocket and a pen behind her ear. And she moved through the tables with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned a long time ago. That being fast meant being invisible, and being invisible meant being safe. Willa was deaf, had been since birth. Couldn't hear the bell above the door, couldn't hear the coffee machine gurgling behind the counter, couldn't hear the old men in booth 2 arguing about the Broncos, couldn't hear any of it. Her world was silent in the way that most people can't even imagine, a silence so complete it was like living at the bottom of an ocean that nobody else even knew existed. But Willa could read lips like she was reading a book, could watch someone's mouth from across the room and know exactly what they were saying sometimes before they'd even finished saying it. And she could sign. ASL American. Sign language fluid and fast and beautiful when she wasn't scared. When she was scared, her hands stuttered. And Willa Mercer's hands stuttered a lot. She approached booth 3 with the coffee pot. The trucker sitting there was a regular big guy. Plaid shirt, didn't talk much. She watched his lips as he looked up from his phone. "Coffee," he said. She poured. Her hand shook just enough that some splashed onto the saucer. She grabbed a napkin, immediately wiping it up her face, flushing with a shame that was way too big for a few drops of spilled coffee. "Sorry," she mouthed. The word came out as a breath, barely a whisper. Willa could speak if she had to. but her voice was something she'd learned to be embarrassed about a long time ago. It came out flat and strange, and too loud or too quiet, and Travis had told her 100 times that it made people uncomfortable, so she stopped using it. Travis had told her a lot of things. A lot of. She finished cleaning up the spill and turned back toward the kitchen, and that's when she felt it. That prickle at the back of her neck, that tightening in her chest. She didn't need to hear him to know he was watching her. She could feel his eyes on her the way you can feel a change in air pressure before a storm. Travis Keller stood behind the kitchen window, arms crossed, jaw tight. Mid-30s, broad-shouldered, the kind of guy who looked like he'd been good-looking once before. Something inside him started rotting and working its way outward. He was the head cook at Rosie's had been for 6 years. He ran that kitchen like it was his personal kingdom, and everyone in it, especially Willa, like subjects who owed him something they could never quite pay off. He caught her eye through the window and made a sharp gesture with his hand. "Come here." Willa's stomach dropped. She set the coffee pot down on the counter and walked to the kitchen window. Her steps careful, measured the walk of someone approaching a dog they weren't sure would bite. Travis leaned forward so his mouth was close to the window opening. He spoke slowly so she could read his lips, but there was nothing kind about the deliberateness. It was the way you'd talk to someone you thought was stupid. "You're moving slow today. You trying to embarrass me in front of customers?" "No." Willa signed quickly. "I'm sorry. I'll be faster." Travis's hand shot through the window and grabbed her wrist. Not hard enough to leave a mark where anyone could see. He'd learned exactly how much pressure to apply and exactly where to apply it a long time ago. His fingers found the same spot they always found the soft underside of her forearm and squeezed. Willa's breath caught. She didn't pull away. She'd learned not to pull away. "You better," Travis mouthed. Then he let go and turned back to the griddle like nothing had happened. Willa stood there for 3 full seconds. She could feel her heart beat in her wrist where his fingers had been. She tugged her sleeve down, checked to make sure the fabric covered the bruise that was already forming on top of the bruise that was already there. Then she picked up the coffee pot and went back to work. That's the thing about Willa's world. In a hearing person's reality, abuse has sound. It has the crack of a slap, the shatter of a plate, the raised voice that makes the neighbors call the police. But in Willa's world, abuse was silent. It happened in the spaces between gestures, in the tightening of a grip, in the way Travis's face changed when nobody else was looking. And because it was silent, nobody noticed. Or maybe they just didn't want to. Travis had been hitting Willa for 3 years, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that he'd been lying to her for 3 years, and she had no way of knowing. See, Travis was Willa's interpreter. Not officially, not professionally. Just the guy who told her what people were saying when she couldn't read their lips, and the guy who told people what she was saying when her signs moved too fast for them to follow. He was her bridge to the hearing world. Her only bridge. And he'd burned it from both sides. When a customer complimented Willa, Travis told her they were complaining. When Willa signed something kind to a customer, Travis translated it as something cold or dismissive. When Willa's mother called the diner 3 years ago, asking to speak with her daughter, Travis told her mother that Willa didn't want to talk to her anymore. When Willa asked Travis what her mother had said, Travis told her that her mother had said she was tired of dealing with a deaf daughter and didn't want to hear from her again. Willa had cried for 3 days after that, and she never tried to contact her mother again. Travis had built a prison out of language itself. No bars, no locks, no chains. Just a man standing between a deaf woman and every other human being on the planet, controlling every single word that went in and every single word that came out. And Willa didn't know. How could she? The lie was invisible because she couldn't hear the truth. The morning moved the way mornings at Rosie's always moved. Slow and steady, the breakfast crowd trickling in between 6 and 8. The same faces in the same booths, ordering the same things they'd ordered yesterday and the day before that. Rosie herself worked the register. A small woman with silver hair and reading glasses on a chain around her neck, tough as a railroad spike, but with a soft spot for anyone who looked like they needed one. Rosie had noticed things about Willa over the past year. Small things. The way she flinched when Travis appeared behind her. The way she always wore long sleeves. The way she apologized for everything, even things that weren't her fault. Especially things that weren't her fault. But every time Rosie tried to ask Willa if she was okay, Travis was right there, hovering, translating, and Willa's answer was always the same. I'm fine. Rosie wasn't sure she believed it, but she also wasn't sure what to do about it. And in a small town like Black Hollow, not being sure usually meant doing nothing. At 9:15, the motorcycles arrived. The sound started as a low rumble somewhere in the distance, like thunder rolling down from the mountains. Not that Willa heard it. She was wiping down the counter when she felt the vibration in the floor, a deep trembling that traveled up through her feet and settled in her chest. She looked up. Through the window, she could see them coming, one bike, then two, then 5, then 10, then more than she could count. They poured into the parking lot like a river of chrome and black leather engines, roaring so loud that the coffee cups on the counter rattled in their saucers. The old couple in booth 2 clutched each other's hands. The trucker in booth 3 put down his phone and stared. Even Rosie stopped what she was doing and muttered something under her breath that Willa couldn't read from that angle, but the expression on Rosie's face said enough. Iron Saints, MC. The name was stitched across the back of every leather vest in letters that looked like they'd been forged in a furnace. Below it, a skull with iron crosses for eyes. 30 men, maybe more, and not a single one of them looked like he'd come here for the pancake special. The door swung open, and the bell rang its tired note, and Willa felt the change in the air, the way she always felt things through vibration, through the shifting of pressure, through something deeper than sound. He walked in first. Axel Grimm, Dalton didn't enter a room. He altered it. 6'3", broad across the shoulders with hands that looked like they'd been built for breaking things, and a face that looked like things had tried to break it right back. His hair was dark shot through with gray at the temples. His eyes were pale, almost silver, and they moved across the room with the slow precision of a man who had learned a long time ago that the most dangerous thing in any space is the thing you don't see coming. He scanned the diner, every exit, every face, every angle. And then his gaze landed on Willa and stopped. Just stopped, like he'd been looking for something without knowing it, and found it standing behind a counter in a stained white shirt with her sleeves pulled down past her wrists. Willa looked away immediately. She could feel his eyes on her, and it made her skin prickle, not with fear exactly, but with something she couldn't name, something that felt like being seen. Booth in the back, Grimm said to the men behind him. His voice was low and rough, like gravel being dragged across stone. The men filed in without a word. Leather creaked against cracked vinyl as they settled into the booths, filling up the entire back section of the diner. Travis appeared beside Willa so fast she almost jumped. He signed to her sharp and quick. Go take their order, and don't be slow about it. Willa grabbed her notepad and forced her legs to move. The walk to the back booth felt like the longest walk of her life. She could feel 30 pairs of eyes on her, could see tattoos and scars, and faces that looked like they'd seen things most people only read about. She stopped at Grimm's table, pulled out her notepad, wrote 2 words, and held it up. Coffee menu. Grimm looked at the notepad, then at her. His expression didn't change, but something shifted behind those pale eyes, barely but enough. Coffee's fine, he said. Willa watched his lips knotted and turned to pour. The pot was heavy in her trembling hands, and the coffee splashed slightly. As she filled his cup, a tiny brown wave that crested the rim and pooled in the saucer. That's when it happened. Her sleeve rode up, just for a second. Just enough. The bruises were yellow-green, fading but unmistakable. 4 marks on the inside of her wrist, perfectly spaced, perfectly shaped. Fingerprints. Someone's hand had been there, and it had been there more than once. Willa saw Grimm's eyes drop to her wrist. She saw them widen, just barely, just enough. And she yanked her sleeve down so fast, she almost knocked the coffee pot off the table. She grabbed her notepad and wrote quickly, her handwriting shaky. I'll give you a minute to look at the menu. But Grimm didn't look at the menu. He was still looking at her wrist. And a memory he'd buried 10 years ago suddenly started clawing its way back to the surface. He knew those bruises. He knew exactly what left marks like that. He knew because he'd seen them before on someone he loved, on someone he'd failed. Her name had been Emily. Emily Dalton had been his little sister by 3 years. She'd had dark hair and his same pale eyes and a laugh that could fill up a room. She wanted to be a teacher, not just any teacher. She wanted to teach deaf kids. She'd started learning ASL in college, came home for Christmas one year, signing everything, making the whole family learn the alphabet at the dinner table. Grimm had learned too, not because he was interested at first, but because Emily had a way of making you want to be part of whatever she was excited about. Emily met a man named Craig Foster when she was 20. He was charming, funny, made her feel special in the way that certain men know how to make women feel special, right up until the moment they start making them feel worthless. The first time Craig hit Emily, she called Grimm. Grimm was deployed overseas, stationed at a base he still wasn't allowed to name. He told her to leave. She said she would. She didn't. The second time Craig hit Emily, she didn't call. She told herself it was a one-time thing. An accident. He was stressed. She'd made him angry. If she just tried harder, loved him better, stopped doing the things that set him off, everything would be fine. The third time, and the fourth, and the fifth, she stopped counting. By then, the excuses had become a language of their own, as fluent and automatic as the ASL she'd taught herself to love. Emily was 22 when she swallowed a bottle of pills in the bathtub of the apartment she shared with Craig Foster. She was dead before the paramedics arrived. Grimm got the call 3 days before Christmas. He flew home to a town that was exactly the same and a world that would never be the same again. He stood at her grave in a suit that didn't fit and shoes that pinched, and he made a promise to a headstone that couldn't hear him. Never again, never again would he see those bruises on a woman and look away. Never again would he tell himself it wasn't his business. Never again would he be the man who didn't ask the question that might have saved his sister's life. After Emily died, Grimm never signed again. The language that had connected them became a reminder of everything he'd lost, every conversation they'd never have, every laugh he'd never see, spelled out in her quick, bright hands. ASL became a ghost language, something that haunted the spaces between his fingers. Until today. Until a girl with reddish brown hair and bruises on her wrist poured him a cup of coffee with shaking hands. The bikers ate eggs, bacon pancakes, toast enough food to feed a platoon. They were loud but not disorderly, taking up space the way men who are used to taking up space do, without apology but without malice. Willa moved between the tables, refilling coffee, taking orders on her notepad, communicating in the only way she could with people who didn't know her language. And Grim watched. He watched the way she apologized every time someone so much as glanced at her. He watched the way she kept tugging her sleeves. He watched the way she looked toward the kitchen every 30 seconds, like she was checking the position of something dangerous. And then he watched the man in the kitchen. Travis Keller, mid-30s, mean eyes. The kind of tight, controlled anger in his jaw that Grimm recognized immediately because he'd seen it in Craig Foster's face in the one photograph he'd found in Emily's apartment after she died. That look. That ownership look. That she belongs to me and I dare anyone to say otherwise? Look. Travis came out of the kitchen carrying plates. He passed behind Willa and Grim, saw her body tense, every muscle going rigid like a deer that's heard a branch snap in the woods. Travis set the plates down, and then, with his back to the dining room so only Willa could see, he signed something to her. Grim's blood went cold because he could read it. 10 years of silence, and he could still read it. The signs were rusty in his mind, but legible like a language you learned as a child that never fully leaves your brain. Travis signed Table 6 says you're too slow. They want a different waitress. Grim looked at Table 6. An elderly couple eating oatmeal in comfortable silence. They hadn't said a word about Willa. They hadn't said a word about anything. The woman had smiled at Willa when she'd refilled their water glasses. Travis was lying. He was signing lies directly into Willa's hands. Willa's face crumpled, just for a flicker of hurt that she quickly buried behind that hollow mask she wore. She signed back, small and ashamed. Sorry. I'll try harder. Travis signed, You always say that. Then he walked back into the kitchen, and Grim understood everything. In that single moment, watching a man use sign language to lie to a deaf woman's face, Grim understood the entire architecture of what was happening. The isolation, the control, the systematic dismantling of a human being's reality using the very language she depended on to understand the world. Travis wasn't just hitting Willa, he was rewriting her life. He was standing between her and every other person on Earth, controlling what went in and what came out, turning her deafness into a cage with himself as the only key. It was the most sophisticated abuse Grimm had ever seen. And it was happening in broad daylight, right in front of everyone in a language nobody else in the room could understand. Nobody except him. 20 minutes later, Willa delivered the biker's food. Her hands were shaking as she set Grimm's plate down eggs over easy bacon wheat toast. She put her notepad on the table and wrote, Anything else? Grimm didn't answer right away. He looked at her, really looked at her, and he saw Emily. Not literally, but in the way that mattered. The same hollow eyes, the same practiced smile, the same woman-shaped hole where a person used to be. Then he did something he hadn't done in 10 years. He raised his hands and signed. The movement was slow, rusty, like a machine that hadn't been oiled in a decade, but the signs were clear. He's lying to you. Willa froze. Her eyes went wide. Her lips parted. She stared at his hands like she just watched a dead man sit up in his coffin. Grimm continued signing each word deliberate. Table 6 didn't complain. They didn't say anything. The woman smiled at you. Willa's face went through something that was painful to watch. Confusion first, then denial, then a crack in the denial that let in something raw and terrible, the first glimpse of a truth she wasn't ready to hold. She shook her head, quick, frantic. No, you're wrong. Grimm signed, I'm not wrong. I read sign language. I saw what he told you. He lied. Willa looked toward the kitchen. Travis was at the griddle, his back turned. She looked back at Grimm. Who are you? Her hands shaped the question like it was the most important question in the world. Just someone who sees you? Grimm signed. Willa's eyes filled with tears. She grabbed her notepad and fled to the counter, her whole body shaking. She pressed her back against the coffee machine and wrapped her arms around herself and tried to breathe. Grimm sat very still. His hands were trembling. 10 years since he'd signed a word, and the first thing he'd said was the truth that nobody else could tell her. Across the diner, Reaper Grimm's VP, a man built like a refrigerator with a beard that reached his chest, leaned over. You good, brother? Yeah, Grimm said. He was not good. He was watching Willa Mercer try to hold herself together behind the counter, and all he could see was Emily in that bathtub. Emily who'd believed every lie Craig ever told her. Emily who died thinking she was the problem. The morning went on. Willa avoided Grimm's booth, sending Rosie to check on the bikers instead. She kept her head down, kept working, but she moved differently now, more careful, more aware, like someone who'd just been told the floor they'd been walking on might be glass. And Travis noticed. Travis always noticed. He came out of the kitchen around 11, ostensibly to bus tables, but really to check on Willa. He stopped beside her at the counter and signed with his back to the dining room. What did that biker say to you? Nothing. Willa signed. Don't lie to me. Nothing, Travis. He just wanted more coffee. Travis stared at her for a long moment. Then he grabbed her elbow, the same spot, the same grip, the same controlled pressure that wouldn't leave a visible mark above the sleeve line. If I find out you've been talking to anyone in this diner about us. He signed with his free hand, his face very close to hers. You know what happens? Willa nodded. Her face was white. Travis let go and walked back to the kitchen. Grimm saw the whole thing. Every sign, every gesture, every flinch. His jaw was so tight it felt like his teeth might crack. That waitress, he said quietly to Reaper. Something's wrong. Reaper glanced over. Wrong how? Grimm didn't answer. He was watching Travis through the kitchen window, watching the way the cook kept positioning himself between Willa and everyone else, watching the way he monitored her movements with the possessive attention of a man guarding something he considered his property. At noon, the diner started clearing out. The breakfast crowd was gone. The lunch rush hadn't started yet. Most of the bikers had finished eating and were heading outside to stretch their legs and check their bikes. Only Grim Reaper and 2 others remained in the back booth. Willa was clearing tables when she dropped a plate. It hit the linoleum and shattered pieces of ceramic spinning across the floor like white teeth knocked loose from a mouth. In a normal diner, someone drops a plate, you hear a crash, a few heads turn, someone laughs, someone says no big deal, life goes on. But Willa couldn't hear the crash. She only felt the plate leave her hands and then looked down to see it in pieces on the floor. And her face went through something that made Grimm's chest hurt. Pure, absolute terror. Not because of a broken plate, because of what a broken plate meant. Travis was out of the kitchen before the last piece stopped spinning. What the hell is wrong with you? He didn't sign it. He said it loud for the whole diner to hear, knowing Willa couldn't hear the words, knowing the performance was for the remaining customers. But then he grabbed her arm and pulled her close and signed with one hand the signs hidden between their bodies. You're going to pay for that tonight. Grimm stood up. The sound of his chair scraping back on the linoleum was loud enough that even Rosie turned from the register. Grimm crossed the room in 4 strides, his boots heavy, his presence filling the space like a change in gravity. He stepped between Travis and Willa, and suddenly there were 6'3" and 220 pounds of scarred leather-clad biker between the cook and the waitress. Travis looked up at Grimm. His face went through several calculations very quickly, the kind of math that bullies do when they encounter something bigger than themselves. You got a problem? Travis asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Grimm didn't answer with words. He turned to Willa, who was pressed against the counter, tears running down her face, a broken plate at her feet, and he signed. Are you okay? Willa stared at him. Her mouth trembled. Travis took a step forward. Hey, I'm talking to you. Who the hell do you think you are coming in here and... Grimm turned back to Travis. He didn't say anything. Didn't need to. He just looked at the man with those pale winter eyes, and Travis's voice dried up in his throat like a creek in August. Didn't think so, Grimm said quietly. Then he turned back to Willa. He crouched down, not to her level exactly, but lower than his full height, less threatening, and he signed slowly. I know you're scared. I know you don't know me. But I need you to hear something, and I know that's a strange thing to say to you, but I mean it. Whatever he's told you, whatever he's made you believe about yourself, it's a lie. All of it. Every word. Willa's face crumbled. Her hands came up to sign, but the signs fell apart. Fingers stuttering, words breaking before they could form. Travis recovered enough to bark from behind Grimm. Willa, let's go. You're coming home. Nobody in the diner moved. Rosie stood behind the register, her hand on the phone. Reaper was on his feet. The 2 remaining bikers had shifted to block the door. She's not going anywhere with you, Grimm said without turning around. Travis's face went red. You don't know her? You don't know us. She's my girlfriend, and she'll tell you herself that she wants to come home. He looked at Willa. Tell him. Willa stood frozen, her back against the counter, trapped between 3 years of conditioning and 5 minutes of truth that had cracked the world open. Travis signed to her, his movement sharp and aggressive. Tell him you want to come home. Tell him you're fine. Do it now. Willa's hands started to move. The reflex was so deeply trained that her body started to obey before her mind could catch up. But then she looked at Grimm, and she saw something in his face that she hadn't seen in anyone's face in 3 years. He believed her. Without question, without hesitation, without needing her to prove anything or explain anything. He looked at her, and he believed that she was in pain, and he cared. Willa's hands stopped. She lowered them to her sides, and she didn't sign what Travis told her to sign. The silence that followed was enormous. Not the kind of silence Willa lived in, the permanent silence of her world, but a different kind, the kind that happens when every person in a room holds their breath at the same time. Travis moved toward her. Grimm's hand shot out and caught Travis's wrist. The grip was the kind of grip that doesn't need to squeeze hard, because the intention behind it communicates everything. Grim held Travis's arm exactly the way Travis had been holding Willa's 4 fingers on the inside of the forearm, and he looked down at the cook and said one word. Don't. Travis tried to pull free. Couldn't. His face went from red to white. Grim released him. Travis stumbled back, cradling his wrist. His eyes were wild now, the eyes of a man who just realized that the thing he'd been controlling had slipped beyond his reach. This isn't over, Travis spat. Yeah, Grim said. It is. Travis looked at Willa one more time. She was crying silently, tears streaming down her face, without a sound, because in Willa's world, even grief was quiet. Travis's jaw worked, like he was chewing on something he wanted to say, something cruel and final. But then he looked at the bikers blocking the door, and the old woman behind the register with her hand on the phone, and whatever he'd been about to say died in his throat. He stormed out. The door slammed so hard the bell above it rang 3 times in quick succession. And Willa collapsed. Not physically. She stayed standing. But the last thread holding her together finally snapped. A wall she'd been holding up for 3 years a dam made of every lie Travis had ever told her, and every truth she'd been too afraid to believe. She slid down the counter until she was sitting on the floor among the broken pieces of plate, her knees pulled to her chest, crying in the absolute silence of a world that had finally heard her anyway. Rosie came around the counter with a glass of water and a dish towel. She knelt beside Willa and put her arm around the girl's shoulders, and Willa flinched so hard at the touch that Rosie almost pulled away. But she didn't pull away. She held on. Grim knelt on the other side. The diner was empty now, except for his men. Reaper stood by the door. The other 2 watched through the windows, keeping eyes on the parking lot in case Travis decided to come back. Grim raised his hands and signed to Willa, slowly, carefully, each word placed like a stone in a path he was building toward her. I know you don't know me, but I need to tell you something. I had a sister. Her name was Emily. She was 3 years younger than me, and she was the best person I ever knew. Willa looked up at him through tears. Her hands were pressed flat against the floor, like she needed to feel something solid beneath her. Emily had a boyfriend, Grim continued signing. And he told her the same things your boyfriend tells you. That it was her fault. That she made him angry. That if she just tried harder, everything would be fine. He paused. Emily believed him. She believed him right up until the day she couldn't believe anything anymore because she was gone. Willa's breath caught. I was deployed when it happened, Grim signed. Overseas. I got the call 3 days before Christmas. Flew home to bury the only family I had left. And I've spent every day since wondering if I could have saved her. If I just asked the right question. If I just paid attention. He looked at Willa, and his eyes were wet, this scarred man, with fists like hammers and a leather vest that had seen things that would make most people sick. And his eyes were wet. Emily learned sign language, he signed. She wanted to teach deaf children. She taught me. After she died, I stopped signing. I couldn't do it anymore. Every word felt like reaching for someone who wasn't there. He paused. His hands were shaking. You're the first person I've signed to in 10 years. Willa stared at him. Then she raised her trembling hands and signed 3 words. Why are you here? Because I made a promise at my sister's grave, Grim signed. Never again. Never walk past another woman who's hurting and pretend I don't see it. So I'm asking you the question I should have asked Emily. The question that might have saved her life if anybody had cared enough to ask it. He held her gaze. Who hurt you? The question hung in the air between them, shaped by hands that hadn't spoken in a decade, received by eyes that had been lied to for 3 years. Willa's chin trembled. Her hands came up, went down, came up again. Everyone she signed. Always. Grimm's jaw tightened. He shook his head slowly. Not everyone. Not always. Not anymore. And for the first time in 3 years, sitting on the floor of a diner, surrounded by broken ceramic and the smell of cold coffee, and a circle of bikers who looked like they could tear the world apart, Willa Mercer felt something she thought she'd lost forever. Something so small and fragile, she was afraid to even name it because naming it might break it. Hope. It felt like the first sign of a word she'd forgotten how to spell. Rosie locked the diner doors. She pulled down the blinds and turned off the open sign and made 3 phone calls. One to her nephew, who was a lawyer. One to the women's shelter 2 towns over. And one to the police department. Officer Boone showed up 20 minutes later. Mid-40s, square jaw, the kind of cop who'd been in Black Hollow long enough to know where all the bodies were buried, figuratively speaking, and who preferred to keep things quiet. He walked in, looked at the bikers, looked at Willa sitting on the floor, looked at Rosie, and said, "What happened here?" Rosie told him, or tried to. She described what she'd seen, the grabbing, the intimidation, the way Travis controlled Willa. But even as she spoke, Rosie realized how little she actually knew. She'd seen pieces, fragments, the visible tip of something that went much deeper than she'd imagined. Boone looked at Willa. He spoke to her directly, slowly. "Ma'am, can you tell me what happened?" Willa stared at his lips. She understood the words, but the reflex was so ingrained, so deeply conditioned, that her first instinct was to look for Travis, to wait for Travis to translate, to let Travis speak for her. Travis wasn't there. Willa raised her hands to sign, but Boone didn't understand. ASL. He looked at Rosie. "She understand me." "She reads lips," Rosie said. "But she can't talk." "She can. She just doesn't." Boone frowned. "Look, I need a statement. If she can't communicate..." "She can communicate," Grimm said from behind them. He'd been standing back, giving Willa space, but now he stepped forward. "She communicates in ASL. I can interpret." Boone looked at Grimm, at the leather vest, the scars, the Iron Saints patch. "You speak sign language?" "I do." Boone was skeptical. That was obvious. He looked back at Willa. "Ma'am, do you want this man to translate for you?" Willa looked at Grimm. The stranger who'd walked into her life an hour ago and spoken the first true words she'd received in 3 years. She nodded. And then a voice came from the doorway. "She doesn't need a translator. She's got me." Everyone turned. Travis Keller stood in the door of the diner, and he wasn't alone. He had a calm expression on his face, the reasonable expression, the one Willa knew well, because it was the face he wore in public, the face that made people believe him. "Officer Travis," said, walking toward Boone with his hand extended. "Travis Keller. I'm Willa's boyfriend. There's been a misunderstanding." Boone shook his hand. "What kind of misunderstanding?" Travis glanced at Willa, then at Grimm, then back at Boone. "My girlfriend is deaf, officer. She's also, and I say this with love, she's got some cognitive challenges. She gets confused sometimes. Scared. She doesn't always understand what's happening around her. And these men," he gestured at the bikers, "they scared her. That's all this is." Grimm's hands curled into fists. Travis continued, his voice smooth and concerned. I take care of her. I'm her primary caretaker. I make sure she eats, takes her medication, gets to work. She depends on me. And these strangers came in and upset her, and now everyone's overreacting. Boone looked at Willa. She was staring at Travis's lips, reading every word, and the blood was draining from her face. Ma'am, Boone said. Is that true? Do you want to go home with him? Travis turned to Willa and signed his back to Boone so the officer couldn't see his hands. Tell him you want to come home. Tell him everything's fine. If you don't, you know what happens. Willa's hand started to tremble. Grimm stepped forward. He just threatened her, he said to Boone. He signed a threat. I saw it. Boone looked between them. I've got two people giving me two different stories, and I can't verify either one because I don't speak sign language. Travis shook his head, performing sadness beautifully. See what I mean? Officer. She gets confused. These bikers have filled her head with stories. She needs to come home where she's safe. Grimm started to speak, but Boone held up a hand. Sir, let me handle this. And in that moment, Willa understood something with perfect, devastating clarity. Nobody was going to believe her. She was deaf in a hearing world, standing between two men who both claimed to speak for her, and the police officer was going to side with the one who looked normal, the one who sounded reasonable, the one who could hear. That's how it had always worked. That's how Travis had built his prison. Not with locks and bars, but with the assumption that the hearing person is telling the truth and the deaf person is confused. Willa looked around the diner, at Rosie, who was wringing her hands, at the bikers who were tense and ready, but powerless in this moment, at Grimm, whose face was tight with a fury she could feel from across the room, at Travis, who was smiling the smile of a man who knew he was about to win. And then Willa did something she hadn't done in 3 years. She picked up a pen. She pulled a paper napkin from the dispenser on the counter, and she wrote, pressing so hard the pen nearly tore through the paper, each letter carved into the thin white surface like she was engraving them in stone. He hits me. He lies about what people say. He lies about what I say. He cut me off from my mother. He is not my caretaker. I am not confused. I am afraid. Please don't make me go with him. She held the napkin up. Her hand was shaking so badly the paper rattled like a leaf in the wind. But the words were clear. Black ink on white paper. No translation needed. No interpreter required. Every person in that diner read those words. Officer Boone read them. Rosie covered her mouth with her hand, and Travis's smile disappeared like a light being switched off. Boone looked at the napkin. He looked at Willa. He looked at Travis. And then he said 4 words that changed the air in the room. Step away from her, sir. Travis's composure cracked. Now, wait just a minute. I said step away. Officer, she's lying. She does this when she gets confused. Sir. Boone's hand moved to his belt. Not to his weapon, but to the handcuffs. I'm not going to ask again. Travis looked at Willa, and for the first time in 3 years, Willa looked back at him without flinching. She was terrified, yes. Her whole body was shaking. But she was looking at him, and she was not looking down. Travis's face twisted into something ugly, something real. The mask fell away, and what was underneath was exactly what Grimm had known it would be. Rage. Pure, concentrated, entitled rage. The fury of a man who believed he owned another human being and had just been told he didn't. This isn't over, Travis said, his voice low and vicious. You hear me, Willa? This is not over. He turned and walked out of the diner. The door didn't slam this time. He closed it gently, deliberately, and somehow that was worse. Boone exhaled. He looked at Willa, at the napkin she was still holding up, at the words that had taken 3 years to write. Ma'am, he said slowly so she could read his lips. Do you want to press charges? Willa looked at Grim. He signed, It's your choice. Nobody will make you do anything you don't want to do. Willa looked back at Boone. She picked up the pen again and wrote one word on the napkin below everything else. Yes. Boone nodded. He pulled out his radio and called for backup. And Willa Mercer sat down on the floor of Rosie's diner for the second time that morning. But this time she wasn't collapsing. She was sitting down because her legs needed a rest after the longest, hardest, bravest thing they'd ever done, which was to stand. Grim sat down across from her. He didn't touch her, didn't crowd her, just sat there, a wall of leather and scars between her and the door, and signed one sentence. You're not alone anymore. Willa looked at his hands at the words, shaped in a language that had connected him to a dead sister, and now connected him to a living woman who needed those words more than she needed air. She signed back, her fingers still trembling, but steadier now, just slightly steadier. I know. Outside, the October wind swept through the parking lot of Rosie's Diner, rattling the sign with the burned out R. 30 motorcycles sat in a row, chrome, gleaming in the thin Montana sunlight. Somewhere in the distance, a truck engine started, and tires peeled out onto the highway heading east. Travis Keller was gone. For now. But the words Willa Mercer had written on that napkin, the words that had taken every ounce of courage in her small, silent, extraordinary body to put down on paper, those words were just the beginning. And in a diner on the edge of a town that had looked the other way, for too long, a deaf girl had finally been heard. The shelter smelled like bleach and donated laundry detergent and the particular kind of quiet that only exists in places where women go to hide from men who are supposed to love them. Willa Mercer sat on the edge of a narrow bed in a room the size of a closet, her knees pulled up to her chest, staring at the phone in her hands like it was a grenade with the pin already pulled. It was her phone, her actual phone, the one Travis had kept in a locked drawer in his nightstand for 3 years, telling her she didn't need it, telling her it would just confuse her, telling her that nobody wanted to talk to her anyway. So what was the point? Rosie had found it when she went to Willa's apartment with Officer Boone to collect her things. Found it in the drawer next to a roll of duct tape and a bottle of sleeping pills and a notebook where Travis kept a log of every person Willa had interacted with. Each day. Names, durations, what they talked about, like a warden, tracking an inmate's visitors. Rosie had cried when she found the notebook, then she got angry. Then she packed Willa's bag and brought her the phone and didn't say another word about it because some things are too ugly for words. Now, Willa held the phone and scrolled through it with numb fingers. 3 years of messages. 3 years of her life edited, deleted, rewritten by someone else's hands. Travis had changed her mother's contact name to Do Not Answer. He'd blocked her mother's number. He'd blocked her aunt, her cousin. The 2 friends from high school she'd still been in touch with. Every single person who might have noticed, who might have asked questions, who might have said something doesn't seem right about this erased from Willa's world with the tap of a finger. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst of it was the messages Travis had sent from Willa's phone. Messages to her mother composed in Willa's name, in Willa's voice, or what Travis imagined her voice would sound like if she had one. Mom, I need space. Please stop calling. I don't want to see you anymore. It's too hard. I'm happy. Travis takes care of me. Please respect my decision. Don't contact me again. Each message was a knife, and Willa read them all one after another, sitting on that narrow bed in that bleach scented room, crying without making a sound, because in Willa's world, even heartbreak was silent. Her mother had replied to every single one, at first with confusion, then with hurt, then with a desperation that bled through the screen. Baby, what did I do wrong? Please talk to me. I love you. Whatever I did, I'm sorry. Willa, please. Just one call. Just let me know you're okay. I miss you so much. Are you sure this is what you want? The messages from her mother stopped 11 months ago. The last one read, I'll be here when you're ready. I love you always. Mom. Willa pressed the phone against her chest and curled into herself and cried the way only someone who has been completely alone can cry with their whole body like every cell is grieving. Patricia Holden had told her to wait. Get settled first. Get the restraining order filed. Take things one step at a time. Patricia was Willa's lawyer now, a tall woman in her mid-50s with silver reading glasses and the kind of voice that sounded like it had argued in front of 100 judges and won more than it lost. She specialized in domestic violence cases, and she worked with a nonprofit that didn't charge up front, which was good because Willa had exactly $37 to her name. But Willa couldn't wait. Not for this. She opened the video call app with shaking fingers. She typed in the number she knew by heart, the number she'd memorized when she was 6 years old, the number her mother had taught her by writing it on the back of her hand every morning before school, just in case. Just in case you ever need me, baby. The phone rang. Willa watched the screen, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her teeth. It rang 3 times. 4. 5. And then the screen changed and a face appeared, and Willa's entire world broke open and rebuilt itself in the space of a single second. Her mother was older, grayer. There were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 3 years ago, and those eyes were red-rimmed like they'd been red-rimmed for a long time, like crying had become a habit that she'd given up trying to break. Willa's mother stared at the screen. Her mouth opened. She said something, a word, probably Willa's name, but Willa couldn't hear it, and the camera was too close and shaking too much to read lips. Then her mother pulled back, and Willa could see her face fully. And her mother was crying and signing at the same time, her ASL rusty but legible, the way a language you learned for love never fully leaves your hands. Baby. Oh, my baby. Is it really you? Willa signed back. Mom, I'm here. I'm sorry. He lied to me. He told me you didn't want me. He sent those messages. It wasn't me. None of it was me. Her mother's face went through something that no human face should ever have to go through. 3 years of grief and confusion and self-blame collapsing in real time, replaced by a rage so pure and incandescent that it burned through the screen. I knew it. Her mother signed her movement sharp with fury. I knew something was wrong. I drove to Black Hollow twice. He answered the door both times. Told me you were asleep. Told me you didn't want to see me. I believed him. God help me, I believed him. It's not your fault, Willa signed. I should have fought harder. I should have broken down, That door, I should have. Mom. Willa's hand steadied. It's not your fault. He used my ears against me. He used them against both of us. They cried together for 20 minutes. Two women on opposite sides of a phone screen, speaking in a language made of hands and hearts, a language that Travis Keller had tried to weaponize and failed. Because you can twist the words, but you can't twist the love behind them. And the love between Willa Mercer and her mother was the one thing Travis had never been able to touch. When the call ended, Willa sat in the silence of her room and felt something settle in her chest. Something solid. Something that had been missing for 3 years and was finally carefully finding its way back into place. She wasn't alone. She had never been alone. She had only been told she was. And the difference between those two things was the difference between a prison and a door. The next morning, Grim showed up at the shelter at 7 with 2 cups of coffee and a manila folder. 3 bikers were parked outside, had been since midnight engines off, just sitting there like leather-clad gargoyles, keeping watch over the building. Willa came down to the common room. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, but there was something different about the way she held herself. Straighter. Like someone had removed a weight from her shoulders that she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it was there. Grim set the folder on the table and signed, "How did you sleep?" "I didn't," Willa signed back, "but I talked to my mother." Grim's expression didn't change, but his eyes softened. "Good." She didn't know Willa signed about any of it. He told her I didn't want to see her. Sent messages from my phone. She thought I hated her. Grim was quiet for a moment. Then he signed, "That's how they operate. They don't just hurt you. They destroy every bridge between you and the people who might help you, so that when you're drowning, you think there's nobody left to call." Willa stared at him. That's exactly what it felt like. Drowning. Grim slid the folder across the table. Information for Patricia Holden. Restraining order paperwork. Emergency housing applications. A list of ASL certified counselors within 100 miles, which wasn't many, but it was more than 0. Willa opened the folder and looked through it with the careful attention of someone who had been making decisions for herself for exactly 1 day and was still getting used to the weight of it. The restraining order she signed. Will it stop him? Grim was honest. It's a legal tool. It gives the police grounds to arrest him if he comes near you. But a piece of paper won't stop a man who's determined. Willa nodded slowly. She'd expected that answer. 3 years with Travis had taught her that the distance between the law and safety was often measured in bruises. Then, what will stop him? Grim looked at her steadily. "We will." Patricia Holden arrived at the shelter at 10 carrying a briefcase and the particular energy of a woman who had been fighting losing battles against the system for 30 years and had never once considered stopping. She sat with Willa for 3 hours, communicating through a combination of written notes, Grim's interpretation, and a video relay interpreter that Patricia kept on her laptop for deaf clients. The restraining order was filed by noon. The hearing was set for the following Tuesday. Meanwhile, Travis was not sitting still. At 4 in the afternoon, Rosie called Grim. Her voice was tight in a way that made the hairs on his neck stand up. "He came by the diner," Rosie said. "What happened?" "He didn't come in. Just parked across the street and sat there for 2 hours. Staring. Then he left." Grim's jaw tightened. "Did you call Boone? Boone came by. Said there's no law against parking on a public street. That's how it always went. The law was reactive, not protective. It waited for something bad to happen before it did anything, and by then it was usually too late. Grim made a call. Within an hour, 8 more bikers rolled into Black Hollow. By nightfall, there were Iron Saints stationed outside the shelter, outside Rosie's diner, and outside the police station, not because they expected trouble there, but because they wanted Boone to see them to understand that this wasn't going away. The town started talking. In the grocery store, at the gas station, in the parking lot after church. Who were these bikers? What were they doing here? Was it drugs? Was it a gang thing? People in Black Hollow weren't used to outsiders, especially not outsiders who looked like they'd been forged in a fire and quenched in motor oil. But they were about to get used to them. 2 days after the restraining order was filed, something happened at the shelter that nobody expected. Willa was eating breakfast in the common room alone, the way she always ate because silence made solitude feel natural, even when it wasn't when a biker walked in carrying a box of donuts. He was younger than the others, late 20s maybe, lean but strong with dark hair and a jaw that looked like it had been hit more than once and had never bothered to complain about it. His name was Trey Dixon, and he had a patch on his vest that said Prospect, which meant he was new to the club, still earning his place. Trey set the donuts on the table. Then he looked at Willa and did something that made her drop her fork. He signed, not perfectly, not fluently, but clearly enough that the words landed. Morning. Brought food. You okay? Willa stared at him. Her hands came up slowly. You sign? Trey nodded and signed back. My mom is deaf. Grew up signing. Willa's eyes went wide. She looked at him with an expression that Grim, watching from the doorway, recognized immediately. It was the face of someone who had been speaking a language alone for so long that hearing someone else speak it felt like a miracle. Over the next hour, Willa and Trey had a real conversation, the kind Travis had made sure she never had. He told her about his mother, a woman named Ruth, who'd been deaf since birth and had raised Trey alone in a small town in Idaho. He told her about growing up bilingual, speaking English with his mouth and ASL with his hands, about how kids at school had made fun of the way his mother talked, and how Trey had gotten into his first fight at 9 years old because a boy in his class had called his mom stupid. She's the smartest person I know, Trey signed. She reads more books in a month than most people read in a year. She just does it quietly. Willa smiled. It was small and tentative and gone almost before it appeared like a bird landing on a branch and immediately taking off again. But Grim saw it, and something in his chest loosened just a fraction. That afternoon, Willa did something that surprised everyone. She asked the bikers at the shelter if they wanted to learn ASL. It started as a practical thing. She needed to communicate with the people protecting her, and she was tired of writing everything on notepads and napkins. But it became something else entirely. Picture it: 20 bikers, men with arms thicker than Willa's waist, covered in tattoos of skulls and flames, and things that would make a Sunday school teacher faint. Men who had been in bar fights and jail cells and hospital rooms. Men who communicated primarily through grunts and nods and the occasional well-placed profanity. And there was Willa, 5'4", 120 pounds, standing in front of them, like a teacher at the world's most terrifying school, patiently showing them how to shape their massive, scarred hands into the signs for basic phrases. You safe, 2 signs. Flat hand near the face, then crossed, fists pulled apart. You safe. We here. Point to chest, point to ground. We here. We The bikers practiced with the awkward concentration of men trying to thread a needle with fingers made for swinging hammers. Reaper kept mixing up help and thank you. A biker named Tiny, who was 6'5" and roughly the size of a small building, managed to sign you safe with such delicate precision that it looked like a butterfly landing on a windowsill. Willa corrected their hand positions with a patience that was almost maternal, touching their fingers to adjust the angle, showing them again when they got it wrong, nodding when they got it right. And the energy in the room changed. These men were learning her language, not the other way around. The hearing world was coming to her. Trey sat in the back of the room watching her teach, and the look on his face was something Grimm filed away and did not comment on because some things a man needs to figure out on his own. On the fourth day, Nicole Briggs walked into the Iron Saints clubhouse. She was 28 years old, brunette, pretty in the way that women who have been through something terrible are sometimes pretty, with a hardness around the eyes that makes their beauty look like armor rather than ornament. She walked past four bikers who tried to stop her, past Diane Steele, who tried to offer her coffee, past everyone, straight to the main room where Grimm was sitting with Reaper, going over a map of Travis's known locations. "I need to talk to you," Nicole said. "About Travis Keller." Grimm looked up. "Who are you?" Nicole's jaw tightened. "I'm his ex-wife." The room went very quiet. Nicole sat down and talked for an hour. Her hands didn't shake. Her voice didn't crack. She told her story the way someone tells a story they've rehearsed 1,000 times, flat and factual, and drained of everything except the truth. She'd married Travis when she was 21, young and stupid, her words. He'd been charming at first, attentive, made her feel like the center of the universe. Then the center started getting smaller. He checked her phone, monitored her friendships, told her that her sister was a bad influence and her mother was toxic and her coworkers were jealous. "Sound familiar?" Nicole said, and the bitterness in her voice could have stripped paint. Then the hitting started. Open hand at first, always where the clothes covered. Then closed fist. Then whatever was nearby, a book, a remote, a coffee mug that shattered against the wall next to her head. Nicole got out after 2 years. She was lucky, she said, and she used that word with a kind of dark irony that made Grimm's stomach turn. She was lucky because she could hear. She could hear when he was coming up behind her. She could hear when his voice changed from charming to dangerous. She could call for help, and someone might actually hear her. "But Willa can't hear any of that," Nicole said. She looked at Grimm with eyes that were burning. "That's why he picked her. Don't you see? He picks women he can control. With me, it was money. He took my paychecks, gave me an allowance, made sure I couldn't save enough to leave. With Willa, it's her ears. He turned her deafness into a leash." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. Photographs of bruises, old and faded now. Screenshots of text messages. And a recording and audio file on her phone of Travis drunk and raging. His voice slurred and vicious, admitting to things that would make a jury's blood run cold. "I kept everything," Nicole said. "For 3 years, I kept everything because I knew he wouldn't stop with me. Men like Travis don't stop. They just find someone new to break." She looked at Grimm. "I want to help, whatever it takes. I want to make sure he doesn't do to another woman what he did to me, what he's doing to Willa." Grimm studied her for a long moment. Then he called Patricia Holden. The court hearing for the restraining order was set for Tuesday. On Sunday night, Travis made his first real move. Willa was at the shelter, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't look, but something made her pick it up. The text message read, "You think you're safe? Those bikers can't watch you forever. Drop the restraining order. Come home. We'll forget this ever happened." Willa's hands went cold. She stared at the screen, reading the words over and over, each repetition driving them deeper into the fear center of her brain. Another message. "I love you. You know that. Everything I do is because I love you." And another. "Without me, you're nothing. You can't survive alone. You're deaf, Willa. The world doesn't care about people like you. I'm the only one who does." And another. "If you go through with this, I'll tell everyone the truth. That you're mentally disabled. That you attacked me. That those bikers kidnapped you. Who do you think they'll believe, me or the deaf girl who can't even speak?" Willa showed the messages to Grim the next morning. He read them in silence, his face getting harder with each one, his jaw working like he was chewing on something made of iron. He signed to Willa screenshot everything. "Save it. Give it to Patricia. This is evidence." Willa nodded, but her hands were shaking again, the steadiness she'd been building over the past few days, crumbling like wet sand. "What if he's right?" she signed. "What if nobody believes me? What if they look at me and just see the deaf girl who can't even talk?" Grim leaned forward. He signed slowly, every word deliberate. Emily believed that too. Her boyfriend told her nobody would believe her, that she was crazy, that she was the problem, and she believed him right up until the end. His hands paused. "You are not Emily. You have something she didn't have. You have proof. You have witnesses. You have a lawyer. And you have an entire motorcycle club that will ride through hell and back for you." He held her gaze. "They will believe you. I'll make sure of it." Tuesday morning came cold and gray. The kind of Montana morning where the sky looks like it's been pressed flat against the mountains like a gray wool blanket too heavy for the peaks to hold up. Willa put on the only dress she owned that wasn't stained with coffee or cooking grease. It was blue simple, and it didn't quite fit because she'd lost weight over the past 3 years. The kind of weight loss that comes from living in a constant state of fear, where your stomach is always too knotted to eat. She looked at herself in the shelter bathroom mirror and barely recognized what she saw. The woman looking back was thin and pale and tired, but there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there a week ago. Something that looked less like hope and more like resolve. When she walked outside, she stopped. 50 motorcycles lined the street. 50 bikers stood in formation, leather vests, gleaming in the weak morning light. And at the front, holding a helmet, was Grim. Beside him stood Trey, who signed to Willa across the distance. "Ready." Willa's eyes filled. She nodded. They rode to the courthouse in a convoy that stretched 2 blocks, engines rumbling like a promise. And when Willa walked up those steps, she was flanked by men who had decided that protecting a deaf waitress from a small town in Montana mattered more than anything else they had to do that day. Travis was already inside, sitting with his lawyer wearing a suit that didn't quite fit his shoulders, looking like a man playing dress up as a respectable citizen. He saw the bikers file in, and his confident expression flickered just for a second, like a candle in a draft. The hearing lasted an hour. Travis's lawyer argued that Willa was exaggerating, that she was confused, that her disability made her an unreliable witness. The word disability was used 7 times. Each time Willa read it on the lawyer's lips, and each time she felt something inside her get harder, denser, like coal being compressed into diamond. Patricia presented the text messages, the photographs of bruises, Rosie's testimony, Nicole's evidence, the logbook Travis had kept tracking Willa's every interaction, and the messages Travis had sent from Willa's phone to her mother pretending to be Willa, cutting off the one person who might have saved her. When the judge asked Willa if she was afraid of Travis, Willa didn't sign. She didn't write on a napkin. She didn't wait for anyone to translate. She spoke. Her voice came out rough and uneven, the voice of someone who hadn't used it in years, flat in places where it should rise and loud in places where it should soften. It was not a pretty voice. It was not a practice voice. It was the voice of a woman who had been told her whole life that her words sounded wrong and had finally decided that wrong words were better than no words at all. Yes, Willa said out loud, looking directly at Travis. I am afraid of him. The courtroom went silent. Not the silence of Willa's world, but the silence of a room full of hearing people who had just been struck speechless. The judge granted the restraining order. 500 feet. No contact. No exceptions. Travis's face, as the gavel came down, was something that Willa would remember for the rest of her life. Not because it scared her, though it did, but because for the first time she saw him clearly, without the distortion of his lies, without the filter of his translations, without the prison of language he'd built around her. She saw a small, furious man who had just lost the only power he'd ever had. And he looked pathetic. Outside the courthouse, the bikers erupted. Strangers honked their horns. Patricia squeezed Willa's hand and signed with the careful letters of someone who had been practicing, "You did it." But Grimm saw the look on Travis's face as he walked out. And Grimm knew the way you know. A storm is coming, not because you can see the clouds, but because you can feel the pressure dropping that this was not over. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, free and confidential support is available 24 hours a day. You are not alone. 3 days after the hearing, Travis violated the restraining order for the first time. He drove past the shelter at 2 in the morning, then again at 4, then again at 6. The security cameras caught his truck each time, same route, same speed, circling like a shark. Boone added it to the file. Patricia added it to the case. The bikers added 2 more men to the night watch. On the 5th day, someone spray painted a word on the front windows of Rosie's diner. The word was liar, 3 feet tall, red paint dripping down the glass like blood. Rosie found it at 5 in the morning. She stood in the parking lot staring at it, with her apron balled up in her fists and her jaw set so tight you could have cracked walnuts on it. She didn't cry. She called Grimm. Then she got a bucket and a scrub brush and started cleaning it off herself because Rosie Gallagher had survived a dead husband, a failed economy, 2 kitchen fires, and 41 years of drunks and deadbeats. And she was not going to let one coward with a spray can break her. The bikers had security camera footage from across the street. Travis's truck, Travis getting out, Travis painting the word. They gave it to Boone. Travis was arrested by noon, posted bail by 3, and was back on the street by dinner. The system was not designed to protect women like Willa. It was designed to process paperwork and follow procedures and give men like Travis chance after chance after chance, while the women they hurt ran out of places to hide. But Willa wasn't hiding anymore. She had changed since the courthouse. The act of speaking out loud, of using her voice for the first time in years, had unlocked something. Words came now where silence used to be. Not a lot, not fluently, but she'd say words here and there. Short ones, sharp ones, the kinds of words that don't need perfect pronunciation to make their point. No. Stop. Mine. Enough. And she kept teaching ASL to the bikers. The lessons became a daily thing, morning sessions at the clubhouse before the day's business began. Reaper could now sign good morning and where's the coffee and a surprisingly elegant thank you. Tiny had mastered you safe and we here, and also I'm hungry, which he used approximately 40 times a day. Trey didn't need the lessons. He sat with Willa afterward, the two of them signing in the rapid, fluid way of native speakers, their hands moving so fast that even Grim could only catch every third word. They talked about everything and nothing. His mother. Her mother. What it was like growing up deaf. What it was like growing up hearing in a deaf household. The loneliness. The connection. The way the hearing world looked at you when your language lived in your hands instead of your mouth. Grim watched them from across the room one afternoon. Trey making Willa laugh with some story about his mother chasing a neighbor's dog with a broom. Willa's hands moving quick and light as she responded, and Grim felt something he hadn't felt since before Emily died. The sense that maybe things could be okay. Not perfect, not easy, but okay. He turned to Diane Steel Reaper's wife, who was standing beside him drying coffee cups. She followed his gaze to Trey and Willa and smiled. She's going to be all right, Diane said. Grim nodded, but the knot in his stomach didn't loosen, because Travis was out there, and Travis was escalating, and men who are escalating don't stop until someone makes them stop, or until they've destroyed everything in their reach. On the 8th day, Travis was arrested again, this time for making threats from a bar 2 blocks from the police station, telling anyone who would listen what he was going to do to Willa when he got his hands on her. One of the men drinking beside him was Reaper's cousin. He called it in. Travis was held for 72 hours. During those 72 hours, something remarkable happened in Black Hollow. Word about Willa's story started to spread, not through the news, not yet. Through the women. A waitress at the truck stop told a cashier at the grocery store. The cashier told her sister. The sister told her book club. The book club told their husbands, and their husbands told each other in that awkward way that men discuss difficult things sideways and without eye contact, but with a sincerity that counts for something. And then the women started showing up. First, it was just one, a young woman in her late 20s with a split lip. She said she got from walking into a door. She sat in Rosie's diner and ordered coffee. She didn't drink and stared at the bikers parked outside, and finally asked Rosie if it was true that there were people here who could help. Rosie introduced her to Patricia Holden. Then 2 more came, then 5, then a woman who was 57 years old and had been married to the same man for 34 years and had never told a single soul what happened behind their bedroom door until she walked into Rosie's diner on a Wednesday afternoon and sat down and said, "I don't know where else to go." Willa met each of them. She couldn't hear their stories, but she could see them. She could see the bruises they tried to hide and the fear they tried to mask and the shame that sat on their shoulders like a physical weight. She recognized all of it because she'd carried all of it. And she signed to each of them the same thing. You're not alone. You were never alone. You were just told you were. Then, Nicole Briggs walked back into the picture with something that changed everything. She'd been working with Patricia for days, compiling evidence, organizing documents, building a case that went beyond a restraining order. And she'd found something. Travis had done this before Willa, before Nicole. There was a woman in Oregon, another in Wyoming, a pattern that stretched back a decade. Different towns, different women, same playbook. Charm, isolate, control, destroy, move on. The woman in Oregon had filed charges. They were dropped when she refused to testify. The woman in Wyoming had disappeared entirely, moved to another state, changed her name, vanished into the kind of anonymity that only comes from absolute terror. Nicole laid the documents on the table in front of Grim and Patricia. 3 women, she said, that we know of. There could be more. There could be. Patricia picked up the files. This changes the prosecution. This isn't a domestic dispute anymore. This is a pattern of predatory behavior. If we can get the Oregon woman to testify. I already found her, Nicole said. Her name is Brooke. She's willing to talk. Grim looked at Nicole with something approaching awe. You did all this yourself. Nicole's expression was hard. I had 3 years to think about what I'd do if I ever got the chance to stop him. She paused. He picks women who can't fight back. Women who are alone. Women the system has already failed. And then he makes sure they stay alone so nobody ever finds out. Her jaw tightened. Well, somebody found out. On the 10th day, Travis got out on bail. And this time, he didn't circle the shelter. He didn't spray paint the diner. He didn't sit in a bar running his mouth. He went to Rosie's house, not to the diner, to Rosie's home. A small farmhouse 3 miles outside of town where Rosie had lived alone since her husband died in 2014. He showed up at 9 at night, knocked on her door politely, and when she opened it, he smiled. Evening, Rosie. Rosie's blood went cold. I just want to talk, Travis said. About Willa, about all this misunderstanding. You need to leave, Rosie said. Her hand was already reaching for the phone in her apron pocket. I will, Travis said pleasantly. I just want you to give Willa a message for me. Rosie didn't answer. Tell her I miss her, Travis said. Tell her the apartment is empty without her. Tell her I've been thinking about all the mistakes I've made and I want to make things right. His smile didn't change. And tell her that if she doesn't drop this restraining order and come home by Friday, I'm going to make sure everyone she cares about understands what it feels like to lose something they love. He turned and walked back to his truck and drove away. Rosie called Grim before she called the police. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone. He's not making threats, Rosie said. He's making promises. And I believe him. Grim believed him too. He'd seen the progression. The texts, the stalking, the vandalism, the threats in bars, the visit to Rosie's home. Each step a little bolder. Each step a little more unhinged. Travis was testing boundaries, pushing limits, building towards something that Grim could feel coming, the way you feel thunder before you hear it. He called every Iron Saints chapter within 300 miles. Get here, he said. All of you. Now. Over the next 48 hours, bikers poured into Black Hollow from across the Mountain West. Montana chapters, Idaho chapters, Wyoming, and Colorado. Even a group from Oregon who had heard the story and rode 12 hours straight to be there. By Thursday night, there were over 100 motorcycles in Black Hollow. The town looked like it was under occupation, and in a way, it was. But this was an occupation of protection, not aggression. Bikers stood guard outside Rosie's house, outside the shelter, outside the diner, outside the courthouse. Everywhere Travis might go looking for revenge. The town didn't know what to make of it at first. But then people started bringing coffee to the bikers standing watch. An old man who ran the hardware store brought blankets when the night temperature dropped. A woman from the church brought sandwiches. A teenager asked Reaper for a photo and posted it online with the caption, "These men are here because one woman was brave enough to say she needed help." But Travis saw it differently. Travis saw an army between him and what he believed was rightfully his. And on Friday morning, when Willa did not come home, when the restraining order was not dropped, when his deadline passed without a whisper of compliance, Travis made the decision that men like Travis always eventually make. He decided that if he couldn't have her, he would burn everything around her until there was nothing left. Friday night, 11:30. Rosie was closing the diner alone because she'd sent her 2 evening cooks home early, and the biker, who was supposed to be stationed at the back door, had stepped away to use the restroom. The window shattered inward. Glass exploded across the counter, across the booths, across the floor that Rosie had mopped not 10 minutes ago. A figure climbed through the broken window, and Rosie turned from behind the register and found herself face to face with Travis Keller. He had a crowbar in one hand and a roll of duct tape in the other, and a look in his eyes that Rosie had seen once before on the face of a dog that had gone rabid in her neighbor's yard when she was 12. That look, that nothing left to lose look. "Where is she?" Travis said. "You need to leave," Rosie said. Her voice didn't shake. 73 years old, 5'2", standing alone in a diner full of broken glass, with a madman between her and the door, and her voice did not shake. Travis swung the crowbar. It hit the coffee machine and sent it crashing off the counter, shattering against the wall. Rosie flinched, but held her ground. "I asked you a question," Travis said. "I don't know where she is. And even if I did, I'd die before I told you." Travis stared at her. Then he smiled. "That's sweet, Rosie. Real sweet." He held up the duct tape. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to come with me, and then we're going to call Willa, and she's going to come get you." Because that's what people like her do. They come for the people they love. Rosie looked at Travis Keller, this man who had been eating in her diner for 6 years, who she'd served coffee to 1,000 times, who she thought was just another quiet cook with a temper, and a girlfriend who bruised easily, and she saw him clearly for the first time. She saw a monster. The biker came back from the restroom and found the broken window and Rosie gone. He called Grim in 30 seconds flat. Within minutes, the clubhouse was a war room. Grim stood at the center phone in hand, his face carved from stone. "He's got Rosie," Grim said to the room. "Nobody knows where." 20 minutes later, Willa's phone buzzed. A video message from an unknown number. She opened it, and her blood turned to ice. Rosie tied to a chair, duct tape over her mouth. Behind her, a cabin wall, wood panels, a window showing trees and darkness. Travis's voice off camera saying, "You've got until 6 a.m. Come alone. No bikers, no cops. Or the old lady doesn't see morning." But that's not what made Willa's heart stop. Rosie's eyes were locked on the camera, and her lips were moving behind the duct tape, pressing against the adhesive, forming words that the tape muffled into silence. Anyone else would have seen an old woman struggling, Anyone else would have seen panic. Willa saw language. She watched the video 7 times, 8, 9. She zoomed in on Rosie's mouth, on the shapes her lips made, beneath the tape on the words that Rosie was trying desperately to form, knowing that Willa was the only person on Earth who would think to look for them. Copper, Falls, Old, Cabin. Rosie was telling her where she was. Rosie was using the one skill that connected them, the skill that Travis had tried to use as a weapon, but that was now being used against him to send a message that only a lip reader could decode. Willa turned to Grim, her hands moving fast. I know where she is. Copper Falls, the old hunting cabin. Rosie told me. How? Grim asked. Willa's hands shaped the answer with a fierce precision that made every biker in the room lean forward. She spoke to me. Through the tape, she moved her lips, and I read them. Because that's what I do. I read what the rest of the world can't hear. The room was silent for 3 full seconds. Then Grim grabbed his keys. Reaper. Get everyone. We ride now. Willa stepped forward. I'm coming. Absolutely not. I know that cabin. I know the back roads. Travis took me there once. There's a logging trail that cuts the drive in half. It's too dangerous. Rosie is there because of me, Willa signed, and her hands were not shaking anymore. They were steady and strong and certain. You saved me. Now let me save her. Now, Grim looked at her. This woman who a week ago couldn't make eye contact without flinching, who apologized for existing, who lived in a prison built of stolen words and twisted signs. This woman who had spoken out loud in a courtroom, who had taught 20 bikers to say you safe in her language, who had just read the lips of a gagged woman through a grainy video on a phone screen and decoded a location that nobody else in the world could have found. He looked at her and he didn't see a victim. He saw his sister the way Emily should have been. Fierce. Unbroken. Ready. Let's ride, Grim said. 50 engines roared to life in the October darkness. And Willa Mercer climbed onto the back of Trey Dixon's motorcycle, wrapped her arms around his waist, and rode into the night toward the woman who had fed her and sheltered her and mouthed words through duct tape because she believed in a deaf girl's eyes more than she feared a madman's hands. The mountains swallowed them whole. And somewhere ahead, in a cabin in the woods, Rosie Gallagher sat tied to a chair and prayed that the girl who couldn't hear was listening. The logging trail was barely a trail at all, more like a scar in the earth. 2 ruts carved by trucks that hadn't driven this way in years, overgrown with scrub brush and loose rock, and the kind of darkness that swallows headlights whole. The bikes bounced and slid on the uneven ground, engines growling, low riders, leaning hard into turns they couldn't see coming. Willa held on to Trey's waist and felt the vibration of the motorcycle through her entire body. She couldn't hear the engines, couldn't hear the wind, couldn't hear the branches scraping against the bikes as they pushed through the overgrowth. But she could feel all of it, every bump, every shift in balance, every surge of acceleration, and she held on tighter. 12 minutes. That's what she told Grim. 12 minutes on the logging trail instead of 40 on the main road. She knew because Travis had brought her here once early in the relationship, back when he still pretended to be someone worth loving. They'd driven out to the cabin on a summer afternoon, and he'd been charming and funny, and she thought this is what happiness feels like. She didn't know yet that he was already mapping escape routes, already calculating how far from town he could take her before anyone would notice she was gone. The cabin came into view through the trees like a wound in the landscape. Small wooden half rotted, the kind of structure that had been built 50 years ago for hunters who didn't care about comfort and had been slowly surrendering to the forest ever since. One window faced east, one faced south. The door was on the north side, and there was no back exit. But there was smoke, thin gray smoke curling up from under the door, illuminated by the faint glow of light from inside. Not a fire yet. Something smoldering. Something waiting to become a fire. Grim held up his fist, and the convoy stopped. Engines cut. Silence. Real silence. The kind Willa lived in every day. The kind that the hearing world never truly experiences, because there's always something: a bird, a breeze, the hum of electricity in the walls. But out here in the Montana wilderness at 3 in the morning, the silence was total. And for once, Willa wasn't the only one standing in it. Grim signed to her in the moonlight, his movements careful. What do you see? Willa studied the cabin. One light inside. South window. The smoke is coming from under the door. She paused. He started something burning. If we wait too long, the whole cabin goes. Grim turned to Reaper and spoke in a whisper that Willa couldn't hear, but didn't need to. She watched Reaper nod, watched 4 bikers peel off to circle around to the far side, watched 2 more move toward the tree line on the left. They were surrounding the cabin, cutting off escape routes, boxing Travis in. Trey touched Willa's arm. She turned. He signed, "Stay behind me, no matter what." Willa nodded, but her eyes were on the cabin. Rosie was in there. Rosie, who had given her a job when nobody else would hire the deaf girl. Rosie, who had found her phone in Travis's drawer. Rosie, who had mouthed words through duct tape because she trusted Willa's eyes more than she feared the darkness. Grim moved first. He crossed the clearing in long strides, crowbar in hand, heading straight for the door. Reaper flanked him on the right. 2 bikers covered the windows. The rest formed a perimeter that nothing was getting through. The door was locked. Grim didn't knock. He jammed the crowbar into the frame and pulled. The wood splintered. The door burst inward. Smoke rolled out like a living thing, gray and thick and choking. Inside the cabin was chaos. A pile of rags and newspapers had been set smoldering in the corner, not fully lit yet, but close. The smoke filled the small space, making it almost impossible to see. And in the far corner, tied to a wooden chair with duct tape over her mouth, was Rosie. She was conscious, coughing violently. Her eyes were streaming from the smoke, but she was alive. When she saw Grim burst through the door, she made a sound behind the tape that might have been a sob or might have been a prayer. Grim was at her side in 3 steps. He pulled the tape from her mouth as gently as speed would allow. Rosie gasped, coughing, sucking in air that was more smoke than oxygen. "He's gone!" Rosie choked out. "Left 20 minutes ago. Said he was going to find Willa. Said if she didn't come to him, he'd go to her." Grim's blood went cold. He lifted Rosie in his arms and carried her out of the cabin into the clean night air. Paramedics would be called. She would be taken care of. But right now, right this second, every instinct in Grim's body was screaming one word: Willa. He turned toward where he'd left her, the edge of the clearing, behind Trey. Safe. But Willa wasn't behind Trey. Trey was standing at the tree line, his face white, his hands already signing into the darkness. She went around back. I tried to stop her. She said she saw something through the south window. What Willa had seen through the south window was Travis. Not inside the cabin, outside it. Moving through the trees on the far side of the clearing. A shadow with purpose, heading not away from the cabin, but circling back toward it, toward the sound of engines, toward the one person he'd come for. Willa had seen him because she was looking, because her eyes had been trained by 22 years of silence to notice what other people missed. Movement in the periphery. A shape that didn't belong. The particular way a human body moves through space when it's trying not to be seen. She went around the back of the cabin, not toward Travis, but parallel to him, keeping the structure between them. She didn't have a plan. She didn't have a weapon. She had nothing except the absolute certainty that she was done running. Done hiding. Done letting Travis Keller decide the shape of her life. She came around the east side of the cabin, and there he was, 10 feet away, standing in the shadows between two pines. His face was half lit by the glow from the cabin window, and in that light, he looked like something from a fever dream. Hollow and desperate, and burning with a fury that had consumed everything else inside him, until fury was all that was left. He saw her, his face changed. The rage shifted into something else, something that was somehow worse. Relief. Possession. The look of a man who has been searching for something he believes is his and has finally found it. He said something. His lips moved. Willa couldn't hear the words, but she could read them. There you are. Willa stood perfectly still. Her heart was hammering. Her hands were shaking. Every survival instinct she had was telling her to run, to scream, to curl up and make herself small the way she'd done for 3 years. But she didn't. She planted her feet in the dirt, and she looked at Travis Keller, and she did not look away. Travis moved towards her. His hand reached out, not to hit her, to grab her, to take her arm the way he'd taken it 1,000 times. 4 fingers on the inside of the forearm, pulling her toward him, pulling her back into the orbit of his control. His fingers closed around her wrist. The same spot. The same grip. The bruise on top of the bruise on top of the bruise. And Willa looked at his hand on her skin, and the thing that had been bending for 3 years finally snapped. Not broke. Snapped. Like a branch that has been bent so far it doesn't splinter, it whips back. She looked up at Travis's face. He was talking. His lips were moving fast, saying things that were probably cruel, probably threatening, probably the same words he'd been saying for 3 years. Words designed to make her small. Words designed to make her afraid. Words designed to remind her that she was deaf and alone and nothing without him. But she couldn't hear them. And in that moment, standing in the dark woods, with smoke drifting through the trees and a madman's hand on her wrist, she understood that her silence was not a prison. It was a shield. His words couldn't touch her. His voice had no power. The weapon he'd used against every other woman he'd ever hurt. The sharp edge of his tongue, the cutting precision of his cruelty, all of it was useless against a woman who couldn't hear a single syllable. Willa raised her free hand, slowly, deliberately, and she signed one sentence directly into Travis Keller's face. You have no power over me. Travis didn't understand ASL. He'd learned just enough to control Willa, just enough to lie to her, but he'd never learned what her language really said. He didn't know what she just signed. But he saw her eyes, and what he saw in them made him tighten his grip. Willa didn't pull away. She leaned in, and then she did something that required no language at all. She opened her mouth, and she screamed. The sound that came out of Willa Mercer was not beautiful. It was not the clear pitched cry of a woman in a movie. It was raw and broken and wrong in all the ways that a voice can be wrong when it has never been trained, never been practiced, never been used for anything except apologies, whispered so softly they barely counted as sound. It was ugly. It was primal. It tore itself out of her chest like something that had been caged for 22 years and was finally violently free. And it was loud. Loud enough to echo off the mountain, loud enough to cut through the smoke and the darkness and the trees, loud enough that Grim 50 yards away, searching the tree line with Reaper, heard it and knew exactly what it meant and started running. Travis recoiled. The sound startled him the way it startles you when something you thought was inanimate suddenly moves. He'd spent 3 years in a silent world with Willa, a world where she never raised her voice because she didn't have one, and the sudden eruption of sound from her throat was like a crack in reality. His grip loosened. Just for a second. Just enough. Willa bit him. She sank her teeth into the hand that was holding her wrist, with the desperate ferocity of an animal fighting for its life, and Travis howled and let go and stumbled backward. Willa ran. She ran toward the light, toward the sound of boots crashing through the underbrush, toward Grim and Reaper and Trey, and every biker who was already converging on the east side of the cabin. Travis recovered fast. He was bigger, stronger, faster. He lunged after her, closing the gap in 3 strides, his hand reaching for her shoulder. And then headlights exploded through the trees. A truck. A silver pickup engine, roaring tires, chewing through the underbrush, crashing into the clearing like a battering ram. It skidded to a stop between Travis and Willa Driver's door, already swinging open, and Nicole Briggs stepped out. She'd followed the convoy. Nobody had told her to come. Nobody had invited her. She'd been at the clubhouse when the call came in, and she'd walked to her truck and started driving, and hadn't stopped until she was here in the woods, standing between Travis Keller and the latest woman he tried to destroy. Travis froze. He stared at Nicole, his ex-wife, the first woman he'd broken, the one who got away. Nicole, he said, and there was something in his voice that was almost pathetic. Almost. Like a man caught doing something terrible who still thinks he can talk his way out of it. Nicole didn't say a word at first. She pulled out her phone, already dialing, already connected to 911, already reciting coordinates she'd been tracking on the GPS since she left the clubhouse. Then she looked at Travis and said the only thing that needed to be said. You picked the wrong women to silence. Travis ran. He turned and bolted into the trees, crashing through the underbrush like a wounded animal. But the bikers were already there. They'd circled the clearing while Nicole blocked his path, and when Travis burst through the tree line on the north side, he ran straight into Reaper and 4 Iron Saints, who were standing in a line that looked like a wall made of leather and bad intentions. Nobody touched him. They didn't have to. They just stood there, arms crossed, blocking every direction, while the sound of sirens grew louder in the distance. Travis spun in circles, looking for a gap, looking for an exit, looking for the kind of escape he'd always been able to find before. Because men like Travis always have an exit strategy, always have a backup plan, always have one more lie, one more manipulation, one more move. But not tonight. Tonight, every exit was closed. Every lie was exposed. Every move had been anticipated by people who cared more about one deaf girl and one old woman than Travis Keller had ever cared about anything in his miserable life. He stopped spinning. He stood in the middle of the clearing, surrounded on all sides, and the fight went out of him. Not slowly, not gradually, but all at once like air leaving a balloon. His shoulders dropped, his hands unclenched, his face went slack. He looked like exactly what he was, a small man who had spent his entire life making himself feel big by making women feel small. And now the women had won. Police cruisers burst into the clearing lights, flashing sirens splitting the night. Officers poured out weapons drawn, shouting commands that Willa couldn't hear but could see reflected in the way every person in the clearing raised their hands or stepped back or pointed toward the man standing alone in the middle. Officer Boone was among them. He walked up to Travis Keller with handcuffs and a look of tired satisfaction and said, "Travis Keller, you're under arrest for kidnapping, arson, violation of a restraining order, and criminal threatening." He paused. "And, personally, it's about damn time." Travis went quietly. He didn't scream. He didn't threaten. He didn't make promises about what he'd do when he got out. He just walked to the cruiser and got in and sat there staring straight ahead while the blue and red lights painted his face in alternating colors, like a mask that kept changing. Willa watched him go from across the clearing. Trey was beside her, his hand on her shoulder. Grim was on her other side, breathing hard, his face streaked with sweat and soot. Rosie was in the ambulance, an oxygen mask over her face, a paramedic checking her vitals, but her eyes were on Willa through the open back doors, and she was nodding. Slowly. Firmly. "I'm okay. You're okay. We're okay." Nicole leaned against her truck, arms crossed, watching the cruiser pull away. She didn't cry. She didn't cheer. She just watched with the quiet satisfaction of a woman who had waited 3 years for this moment and found that it tasted exactly like she thought it would, like justice. Willa looked down at her wrist, at the bruise that was already darkening where Travis had grabbed her for the last time. She touched it gently with her other hand. Then she pulled her sleeve down. Not out of shame, not to hide it, just because it was cold, and because the bruise didn't define her anymore. Grim signed to her in the flashing lights. "You okay?" Willa looked at him, this man who had spoken her language after 10 years of silence. This man who had seen her bruises and asked the question nobody else had asked. This man who had kept a promise to a dead sister by saving a living stranger. She signed back. "I'm okay." And she meant it. The trial took 4 months. 4 months of depositions and evidence gathering and legal motions and the slow grinding machinery of a justice system that was for once grinding in the right direction. Patricia Holden built a case that was less a legal argument and more an architecture of horror. She laid it out brick by brick. The 3 years of abuse, the stolen phone, the forged messages, the isolation, the manipulation of Willa's deafness, the pattern that stretched back a decade through Nicole and Brooke in Oregon, and the woman in Wyoming who finally agreed to testify by video from an undisclosed location. Travis's lawyer tried everything. Tried to paint Willa as unreliable, tried to argue that her deafness made her unable to accurately perceive events, tried to suggest that the bikers had intimidated her into making false accusations. None of it worked. Because Willa had something that Travis had never anticipated. She had her voice. Not her speaking voice, though she used that too. She had the voice she'd always had, the one that lived in her hands, the one that Travis had tried to hijack and distort and control. In the courtroom with a certified ASL interpreter, standing beside the witness box, Willa told her story in her own language for the first time ever. Every sign translated accurately, every word reaching the jury exactly as she intended it. No filter, no distortion, no man standing between her and the world deciding what went in and what came out. She told them about the first time Travis hit her, about the bruises she hid under long sleeves, about the phone he took and the messages he sent in her name, about the way he twisted her language, turning ASL from a bridge into a cage. She told them about the morning Grimm walked into the diner, about the moment a stranger signed to her in a language she thought she'd lost, about the napkin she wrote on with a pen pressed so hard it nearly tore through the paper. And she told them about the cabin, about the smoke, about Travis's hand on her wrist, about the scream that tore itself out of her body like something being born. When she finished, the courtroom was silent. The interpreter lowered her hands. The jury stared. And Travis Keller, sitting at the defense table in a suit that didn't fit, looked at the woman he'd spent 3 years trying to erase and saw, maybe for the first time, that she was more real than he had ever been. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They came back with guilty on all counts: kidnapping, arson, assault, criminal threatening, violation of a restraining order, and a new charge that Patricia had fought to include coercive control, one of the first cases in Montana to use the statute. The judge sentenced Travis to 18 years. When the gavel came down, Willa didn't flinch. She sat in the gallery beside Grimm and Trey and Rosie and Nicole and Patricia and Diane and Reaper and a row of bikers that stretched from one end of the courtroom to the other, and she watched the man who had stolen 3 years of her life get led away in handcuffs. She felt Trey's hand find hers. She felt Grimm's hand on her shoulder. She felt Rosie squeeze her arm. And she felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Not relief, not joy, not triumph. Sadness. A deep, quiet sadness for the 3 years she'd lost, for the conversations she'd never had, for the mother she'd been separated from, for the person she might have become if she'd never walked into Rosie's diner and met a cook with a charming smile. But sadness, she was learning, was not the same as weakness. Sadness was what happened when you finally stopped surviving long enough to feel the weight of what you'd survived. And that weight, heavy as it was the weight of a life being reclaimed. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, free and confidential support is available 24 hours a day. You are not alone. The months that followed were not easy. Nothing worth building ever is. Willa had panic attacks. They came without warning, striking in grocery stores and parking lots, and in the middle of the night, her body catching up to traumas her mind had been too busy surviving to process. She started seeing Margaret Weaver, the crisis counselor, twice a week. Margaret learned basic ASL for their sessions, and the first time she signed, "How are you feeling today?" instead of saying it, Willa cried for 10 minutes. She moved out of the shelter and into a small apartment above the bookstore on Main Street. Grimm installed a deadbolt and a camera system. Trey painted the walls a soft yellow because Willa said yellow was the color of sound in her imagination, bright and warm and impossible to ignore. Willa enrolled in community college. She'd always wanted to study social work, had dreamed about it before Travis turned her dreams into things to be ashamed of. The college arranged ASL interpreters for her classes, and on her first day, she walked into an introduction to psychology lecture and sat in the front row and didn't apologize to anyone for being there. Trey drove her to campus on the back of his bike every morning. They didn't label what they were not yet because Willow was still learning how to be a person before she could learn how to be someone's partner. But they signed to each other every night on the phone, long conversations that lasted until one of them fell asleep, and the ease between them was something that Willa had never experienced before. The ease of being understood without having to fight for it. Grim watched it all from a careful distance. He didn't hover, didn't push. He showed up at the diner every Saturday morning for breakfast, sat in the same booth, ordered the same eggs and toast, and signed with Willa when she brought his coffee. One Saturday, about 3 months after the trial, Willa sat down across from him during a slow stretch. She signed, "Can I ask you something?" Always Grim signed, "Do you still think about Emily every day? Does it still hurt?" Grim was quiet for a moment. His hands moved slowly. "It hurts different now. It used to hurt like a wound. Now it hurts like a scar. Same injury, just healed different." Willa nodded. She understood scars. She signed, "You saved me. You know that, right?" Grim shook his head. "No. I asked you a question. You saved yourself." Willa smiled. It was a full smile, a real one. The kind that involved her whole face, not just her mouth, and it was the most beautiful thing Grim had seen since the last time Emily had laughed at something stupid he said at the dinner table before she died. "Emily would have liked you," Grim signed. "Yeah." "Yeah. She would have said you were the toughest person she ever met." "I'm not tough." You screamed in the face of a man who wanted to kill you while standing in the dark in the middle of nowhere with no weapon and no backup. Grim's eyebrow went up. "You're tough." Willa laughed. It came out as a sound, a rough, imperfect burst of noise that was halfway between a bark and a hiccup, and was absolutely nothing like the laugh of a hearing person. Two customers at the counter turned to look. Willa didn't care. She was done caring about how she sounded. The idea came to her in the middle of the night, the way the best ideas do, arriving fully formed, like something that had been waiting in the dark for her to be ready to see it. She called it Hands That Speak, a program, a training program, teaching ASL to first responders, to police officers, to emergency room nurses, to domestic violence counselors, to anyone who might be the first point of contact for a deaf person in crisis. Because what had almost destroyed Willa wasn't just Travis. It was the world's inability to communicate with her without going through him. The police officer who couldn't understand her signs. The customers who looked through her. The system that defaulted to believing the hearing person because the hearing person could talk, and the deaf person could only gesture. Hands That Speak would change that, one sign at a time. She brought the idea to Grim first. He read her proposal, a 4-page document she typed on her laptop at 2 in the morning with coffee stains on the margins, and when he finished, he signed one word. Yes. She brought it to Patricia, who found a nonprofit willing to provide seed funding. She brought it to Rosie, who offered the diner as a training space on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. She brought it to Nicole, who volunteered to help coordinate outreach to other abuse survivors. And she brought it to the Iron Saints. On a cold evening in February, Willa stood in the clubhouse of the Iron Saints MC in front of 60 bikers and taught the first official Hands That Speak class. She wore a yellow sweater, and her hair was down, and she looked like the furthest thing in the world from the trembling ghost who had poured coffee with shaking hands 5 months ago. She taught them the alphabet first. 26 letters shaped by 26 configurations of fingers and thumbs, each one a building block of a language that most of the men in that room had never thought about before. Then she taught them phrases. You safe, we here. Who hurt you? You're not alone. I believe you. 60 bikers practiced with the same intensity they brought to everything else. Massive scarred hands shaping delicate letters, tattooed knuckles curving into signs that meant safety and protection and belief. Reaper got frustrated with the letter R and accidentally signed something that meant turnip, and the room erupted in laughter that Willa felt through the floor. But the moment that mattered, the moment that Willa would remember for the rest of her life, came at the end of the session. She'd been teaching for 2 hours. Her hands were tired. She was about to wrap up when tiny 6'5" and 300 pounds of muscle stood up from his chair and signed to her in slow, careful, imperfect ASL. My daughter was hurt. I couldn't protect her, but I can learn this. For the next one. Willa's eyes filled. She signed back, that's why we're here. For the next one. 60 bikers signed it back to her. Not perfectly, not fluently, but with the kind of sincerity that doesn't need perfect form to make its point. For the next one. 1 year after the morning, Grim walked into Rosie's diner. The town of Black Hollow held a rally for domestic violence awareness. 2,200 people showed up. Bikers from 9 states rode in. 3 news crews filmed from the back. A stage was set up in the town square, the same square where people used to cross the street to avoid the Iron Saints. Willa stood on that stage and looked out at the crowd and felt the mountain air on her face and the sunlight in her eyes and the steady warmth of Trey's hand in hers from the front row. She didn't speak. She signed. A certified interpreter stood beside her, translating into English for the crowd. But Willa's eyes were on the people watching her hands. The bikers who'd learned her language. The women who'd come forward because of her story. The old couple from booth 2 at the diner who had learned the sign for brave and were holding it up from the 5th row. 1 year ago, Willa signed, I lived in silence. Not the silence of my world, which I was born into and which I love, but the silence of being erased, of having my words stolen. A man decided that my silence meant I had no voice. He made himself the only door between me and the world, and then he locked it from both sides. He told me nobody was out there. He told them I didn't want to be found. And for 3 years, I believed him. The crowd was motionless, 2,000 people holding their breath. But then someone asked me a question Willa signed. 3 words. And those 3 words broke open every lie I'd ever been told. She looked at Grim, standing at the edge of the crowd, arms crossed, eyes wet. The man who had spoken her language after a decade of silence, the man who had kept a promise to a dead sister by signing truth into the hands of a living stranger. He asked me who hurt you. And for the first time, I answered honestly. Not because he saved me. He didn't save me. He gave me the space to save myself. And that is what we can do for each other. Not rescue, not fix. Just ask the question. Just listen to the answer. Just believe. The interpreter's voice carried Willa's words across the square, but it was Willa's hands that the crowd watched. Hands that had been used against her. Hands that had trembled for 3 years. Hands that now moved with the fluid certainty of someone who had found her voice in the one place nobody thought to look. If you are being hurt, Willa signed, please hear me. And I know that's a strange thing for a deaf woman to say, but I mean it. Hear me. You are not alone. You are not the problem. And there are hands in this world that want to help you if you just reach out. The applause was something Willa couldn't hear, but could feel. It rose through the stage and into her feet and up through her body like a wave, and she stood in the center of it and let it wash over her and didn't cry. Not because she wasn't moved, but because she'd done enough crying for one lifetime and she was ready for what came next. After the rally, a woman approached Willa. Young, early 20s. She had a bruise on her cheekbone that makeup couldn't quite hide, and she was signing. Not well, not fluently, but enough. I need help, she signed. My boyfriend. She stopped. Couldn't finish. Willa took her hands. She held them gently the way Grim had held hers that first day on the diner floor, and she signed, I know. I've been where you are, and you are going to be okay. She introduced the woman to Patricia, to Nicole, to the network of people and bikers and lawyers and counselors who had grown from one question in a diner into something that stretched across the state. And the cycle began again. One woman's hands reaching for another, one story giving courage to the next. One moment of someone finally signing the truth, creating a ripple that would travel farther than sound ever could. That evening, Willa sat on the roof of her apartment with Trey beside her, watching the sun go down behind the mountains. The sky was pink and gold, and the kind of blue that only exists in Montana in October, and the town below was quiet in the way that small towns are quiet at the end of a long day, not empty, just resting. Trey signed, You were amazing today. Willa leaned her head on his shoulder. We were amazing, all of us. Your mom cried. My mom always cries. She's proud of you. Willa smiled. I know. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind of silence that isn't absence, but presence. Two people who didn't need sound to fill the space between them because the space between them was already full. Then Trey signed, My mom wants to meet you. Willa looked at him. Really? She said anyone who can teach 60 bikers sign language can handle Sunday dinner with her. Willa laughed. That rough, imperfect, beautiful sound that was hers and hers alone. Tell her I'd love to. Willa signed. Below them, Black Hollow settled into evening. Rosie's Diner was still open, new windows gleaming the neon sign, finally fixed, all 6 letters, burning bright against the coming dark. Inside the walls were covered with flyers for Hands That Speak. A poster by the register listed the ASL signs for Help Safe Believe and a phone number for the domestic violence hotline. Once a month, the Iron Saints filled every booth for a free community breakfast where survivors could come and eat and talk and know they weren't alone. Grim still showed up every Saturday. Same booth, same order, same quiet presence. He'd started teaching ASL classes at the Veterans Center on weekends, something he'd never told anyone about until Willa found out and showed up to help. He signed better now than he ever had. Better even than when Emily was alive, because the language had stopped being a ghost and become a gift again. Nicole Briggs became the outreach coordinator for Hands That Speak, traveling to police departments and hospitals across Montana to teach first responders how to communicate with deaf victims. She carried a folder with her everywhere she went, the same folder she'd brought to the clubhouse that first day, full of evidence and photographs and the recordings of a man who thought he was untouchable, and who she never let anyone forget what Travis had done. And she never let anyone forget that the women he tried to silence were the ones who brought him down. Patricia Holden took the coercive control statute that had helped convict Travis and pushed for it to be strengthened, advocating for language that specifically addressed the manipulation of disability as a tool of abuse. The bill was introduced to the state legislature 7 months after the trial. It was called Willa's Law. And Willa Mercer, the deaf girl from Black Hollow, who had once believed she was invisible, who had lived for 3 years in a prison built of stolen words, who had screamed in the darkness with a voice she'd been told was worthless. Willa Mercer kept asking the question. In shelters and courtrooms and community centers and diners, in sign language and written words, and the rough, imperfect sound of a voice that refused to be silent anymore. Who hurt you? 3 words, 3 signs, shaped by hands that had been broken and healed again until they were strong enough to hold the weight of someone else's pain. Because that's what Willa had learned in the years since a stranger walked into a diner and signed the truth into her trembling hands. That silence isn't the same as safety. That hearing isn't the same as listening. That the most powerful voice in the world isn't the loudest one. It's the one that finally tells the truth. And in a small mountain town in Montana, a deaf girl's truth had started a revolution that was louder than anything the hearing world had ever known.